So 2.7 is about percent of change. In 2.6 we talked about ratios and proportions, and we know that if two ratios are equal to one another, or are equivalent ratios, then a way of saying that is that they are proportional to one another. So that's going to kind of be related to what we're talking about today. We're talking about percent of change. Now change is inevitable. Even if you go to the store, you'll see that there's always some kind of percent of change, okay? So the definition here, percent of change is the ratio of the change in an amount to the original amount expressed as a percent. So if obviously the new number is bigger than the original number, then it's a percent of increase. And the opposite, if the number is less than the original, then the percent of change is a percent of decrease. So let's get to an example here. It says determine whether each percent of change is a percent of increase or percent of decrease. You can look at just the numbers that they give you in letter A. Original is 20 and the final is 23. Obviously it's a percent of increase. So the number is going to get higher, and so we do need to figure out by how much percent does it increase. Okay? Now, in order to figure out the change, you gotta first have the final minus the original. That's the change, right? So the final minus the original, and that is going to be in the numerator, and that's going to be over the original. And since we're dealing with percents, the original 20 is 100%, and so since we're looking for the percent of change, that's the variable that we're looking for. Okay, so if we were to fill this in, we have the final, which is 23, minus the original, which is 20, over the original, which is 20, and then x over 100. And then you could just go ahead and solve it. So pause the video, take a minute, evaluate 23 minus 20 first, and then go ahead and cross multiply. So after you evaluate 23 minus 20, you get 3 over 20 is equal to x over 100. You cross multiply, and then after you solve, you get x is equal to 15. Now make sure we answer the question. It says then find the percent increase. So our final answer really is 15% increase. Go ahead and try letter B on your own. Set up the problem and then solve it. Solve for that missing variable. Now be careful, because it is always the final minus the original. It's not always going to be the bigger number minus the smaller number. So in this case, we ended up with 17 minus 25 in the numerator for the percent of change, and we ended up with a negative 8. And it's fine that we have a negative, because x is equal to negative 32. What that actually means is that the negative is a decrease. So it is a 32% decrease. So when you get a negative, it just means a 32% decrease. So if you didn't get that, you can pause the video, rewind, or pause and just catch up on your paper copy. Otherwise, you can go ahead and go down to the next example. Now, I rewrote the equation so that we're just remembering it. And in a real-world example, it says the total number of passengers on cruise ships increased 10% from 2007 to 2009. If there were 17.22 million passengers in 2009, how many were there in 2007? So, if you really think about what they're asking for, they are asking for the original number. Now, that means we should know what the percent is. It says it increased, so it's going to be positive, by 10%. So we know that 10%, or we should know, is 10 over 100. So we actually know what our percent of change is. So that's 10. Now, what we also know is 17.22 million passengers represents the 2009. That is a newer version. So that's my final. So 17.22. What we're missing in this case is our original number, which I'm going to put for n into both spots. And so that's fine that n is in both spots because we're just going to cross multiply. So go ahead and cross multiply and at least set up the problem. Pause your video, set up the problem. So there's my setup after I cross multiply. 10 times n is equal to 100 times the quantity, 17.22 minus n. Now, I'm just going to distribute the 100 on the right side here, and then you just have to solve. So go ahead, take a minute, pause the video again, solve for your n. After I solved it and combined the n's on each side, added 100n on each side and divided by 110, I got 15.65. Now what does this number signify? Again, in our case, n stood for the original amount in 2007, so this means that there were 15.65 million passengers in 2007. If you had some trouble with that example, please pause, rewind, and rewatch that video. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to the next few examples. Try reading the problem to yourself and then set up the equation. So some things I underline here is a recent percent of increase, so I know it's going to be positive, in tuition at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois was 5.4%. If the new cost, which is the final cost, is $33,408 per year, find the original cost. So here's my setup. There's my setup. My final $33,408 minus the original divided by the original is equal to 5.4 over 100. So go ahead, cross multiply, and then solve for the original number, and then give me a sentence at the end. There's my work. You can pause it for a bit, look at it, examine it, make sure I'm right, and then my tuition cost was $31,696 originally, which makes sense because I do want a smaller number for my original cost per year. Okay, I'm going to go down to the final two, and I'm actually going to choose one of them, and you can do the last one on your own. It says Marta is purchasing wire and beads to make jewelry. Her merchandise is $28.62 before tax. If the tax is 7.25% of the total sales, what is the final cost? So this one's a little bit more challenging, but let me remind you of the formula. And go ahead and try to fill it in and solve for the final cost. Now this time we're looking for the final cost. So examine my work. After taxes, your price will be higher, and you'll see that my final price was $30.69. I'm actually not going to do example 4, but let me tell you what the answer is so that you could do it and just making sure that you're on the right track. When you set up and solve example number 4, Tyrell will pay $68 per month. Alright, if any of this was a little bit confusing, just pause, try to rewind, try to rewatch it, and then you can come back tomorrow or the next day with questions.